very excited to turn it over to Sandra Albro from Holden Forests and Gardens. She is a terrific lady. I'm sorry, Sandra, I could not help myself. And I'll let you take it away.
Tree puns. Thank you, Kristen. I'm happy to moderate this panel. We have a great panel for you today featuring Jason Wood, PhD, who's the Chief of Sustainability in the Mayor's Office of Sustainability at the City of Cleveland. We're also joined by Elizabeth Grace, Director of Urban Fundraising at Western Reserve Land Conservancy and Chair of the Cleveland Tree Coalition, and Courtney Blashka, Director of Community Forestry and Conservation at Holden Forests and Gardens and co-chair with Kathy Lynn of the Forest City Working Group. In today's sessions, we'll be talking about equitable tree canopy in Cleveland. So our most recent tree canopy cover assessment showed that our tree canopy in Cleveland is just 18%, down 19% from a measure taken 6 years prior. And we're currently losing about 75 acres per year. So Chief Wood will talk about an updated tree equity score that will help drive decision-making on city-owned land. And then Elizabeth and Courtney will talk about the work of the Cleveland Tree Coalition and the Forest City Working Group. We hope to make this discussion a bit interactive, so we'll put questions for you in the chat. Please answer in the chat, and then at the end of each speaker's remarks, I'll just ask the speakers to pause and we'll reflect on any discussion going on in the chat relevant to their presentation, and then we'll have time for general discussion after all three speakers have wrapped up. I think that's it. I'll turn it over to Chief Jason Wood. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. So I think if you jump to the next slide, I think that's the first one. There we go. So, I think this is a great way to cap off the summit to talk about trees, because I think we all know this, and I think it goes without saying that trees are really a critical component of our urban fabric. And restoring tree canopy is a pretty big priority for us. We've seen a lot of discussion, and it's come up as you kind of have sat through panels and discussions, whether it was our clean energy discussion yesterday or some of the energy efficiency discussions earlier. Today, trees are going to come up over and over again because they're such an important part of our urban fabric, but they solve so many different challenges for us. I think we've seen that the tangible benefits outlined in the tree plan and really kind of understand how it works. But we're really focused at the city level on trying to make our canopy a top priority. And we did this by adopting the goal of restoring the canopy to 30% by 2040, and then kind of making that the formal city policy in the 2018 cap update. Mayor Jackson committed an additional $1 million per year for the next 10 years, 9 years now, for planning. We participate in the Cleveland Tree Coalition, which you're going to hear a lot about over the next 20 minutes or so. And then updating our approach to maintenance and trimming and increasing staffing to support that need. One of the missing pieces for us, though, as we kind of thought about how to take what we're doing around tree planting and link it more directly to our cap kind of cross-cutting priorities around equity, was how do we begin to embed that into our tree planting operations? So after a bit of data work, we've been able to develop a model that will allow us to be more equitable in how our street tree planting process plays out. And that's what I'm going to walk through today. So if we could skip to the next slide. I think a good place to start the discussion is where we started our own process. And this was by developing a better understanding of where our trees are. So when I say where our trees are, I mean the ones that the city owns and is responsible for maintaining. So these are primarily in parks and along the sides of streets and tree lawns. So what we've got here, and it's really hard to see, so this is one of those little small things that Kristen was referencing. This is the map of our street tree inventory. And if you kind of zoomed in on this and we're kind of able to kind of work through it, what you can see is that our street trees are not spread equally across the city. Now, this isn't anything new, and I think this mirrors largely what we see in the tree plant canopy coverage maps. That we have a lot of pockets where our canopy just isn't as strong, and we have a lot of pockets where our street tree base isn't as kind of robust as we would like it to be. But it does give us a picture of how we kind of make the linkage between what we're doing at the city, capital C city planning level with the broader community needs. So this data comes out of the city's urban forestry's tree tracker system. So that's their kind of main system of operation. And we've begun to move all of this into our GIS system, which will ultimately allow us to migrate that data into our asset management system. And this is important because it's going to help us do a couple of things. Number one, it's going to help us improve maintenance because we can begin to schedule that and track that in a different way, similar to the way we do with all of our other city assets. It's going to make coordination with other departments a little bit easier because now they'll all have a shared platform, and trees as an asset will be in that same system with all of the other city assets that we're monitoring and tracking. And it's going to also help us make sure that anytime someone touches our right-of-way, they're aware of the tree assets that are in that right-of-way stretch where they're working during the planning and development process. So hopefully that will allow us to do more kind of preservation longer term because those assets are going to be readily identifiable in the planning development process. If you can go to the next slide. So our urban forestry operation, like I said, is really responsible for maintaining all of the city-owned trees. And they have adopted this kind of planting with a purpose approach. And what this really is about moving beyond just thinking about planting trees to really focus more on establishing trees. And really they've done this by putting the focus on three big things. One is to put the right trees in the right place. So making sure that whatever we're planting can survive in the space that it has and the type of soil and all of those other considerations we know are particularly important for trees. Planting during the right season. So knowing that this tree is more likely to establish successfully if it's planted in the spring versus fall and vice versa. And then lastly, really making sure we've got consistent maintenance plans for all of the trees that we plant, particularly in those early years when we know that's really important. So to help us do that and kind of keep that at the forefront of our mind, we've been able to increase our planning budget by $1 million a year. So if you were at the summit a few years ago, Mayor Jackson made that commitment. And then 2020 was the first year we really had that money available to us. So what you can see in the chart on the right, there is what the impact of that was. In 2020, the first year that funding was available, we were able to increase our planning about 300% over the previous 5-year rolling average, right? So we've gone from about 400 to 500 trees a year up to almost 2,000. We anticipate that growth is going to continue in 2021. I think we're still rounding out a little bit of what we're able to get done in the fall. And then into 2022, when we're going to kind of get to that more of a steady state operation with that available funding, we think we're going to be able to plant about 3,000 trees a year using that. Now that increased planning is really impressive and it looks great on the chart. And it's something that we're proud of and we think that it helps. But I think we always need to keep in the back of our mind that in order for us to get back to that 30% canopy goal by 2040, we've got to plant a lot of trees. I think between 25 and 30,000 trees a year is what we'll need to plant to completely reverse that trend of 75-acre loss that Sandra referenced and get back to where we're growing at the right rate so that we can hit that 30% goal by 2040. So because of some limitations in terms of available planting locations that the city owns and controls where we can do that, we need really strong partners in the private side to help kind of plant more trees and step up on and really help facilitate some of this on private property and other places, which is what we're seeing happening from the Tree Coalition. So I think it's great that Elizabeth is on here and that Courtney and others are really kind of able to kind of speak to that side of it because we have such great partnerships to help us do that. It's the only way we're going to be successful. But in addition to that, it also means that as we think about where we invest the city money, we need to add another consideration to our planning with a purpose model. And that's really to include some type of measurement or calculation so that we can figure out where that tree can do the most good. If you want to skip to the next slide, we can start to talk a little bit about the model itself. And I think to understand what we're trying to do, it's important to kind of understand what we're doing now. So in addition to kind of helping coordinate planning activity, the Tree Coalition has been a really great partner and asset in that they've helped develop the Cleveland Tree Plan. And this report provides the foundation for how we've been targeting plantings for the past few years. So the map kind of shows where neighborhood canopy is low. And this is what we've been using up to this point to help guide where we put new trees in. At the city level, we convert it to wards because that's how our system is set up to work. But essentially, this is how we've been targeting our planting efforts for at least the last 2 years. And this approach is better than just kind of kind of going wherever we want to go, but we know that we can refine it and do an even better job at maximizing the value of our tree planting efforts, right? So we know that the marginal value of a tree is different based on where it goes, because we know that it touches so many different policy areas, right? Like it can help us address so many different challenges that putting that tree in one place can help us kind of get more value than we may if it goes somewhere else. So under the current approach, where we're just kind of are following this low canopy approach, what we end up doing there is we don't account for all of the different ways that we can impact things positively, and we end up missing opportunities to address some of those important areas. So this includes things like differences in property values, racial equity, urban heat island effects, asthma rates, and other health-related or other health challenges that are heat-related or exacerbated by heat. And then even kind of air pollution and stormwater management. So those are all things that we can use trees to help us target and do a little bit differently from our planning approach. If you jump to the next slide. So what we decided to do was step back and develop kind of what I think is a more precise from a spatial standpoint and broader from an impact standpoint approach to tree planting. It's spatially more precise because we're kind of moving the targeting from the neighborhood or ward level down to targeting block groups. And it's broader in that we've moved it from kind of a canopy-driven approach to one that accounts for canopy, which is an important factor, but also a variety of other social, economic, health, and environmental factors as well. The good news is that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel from this, right? There's good data sets out there on this already. So American Forest, for example, has their tree equity score, which we candidly used as the base for this model. It was a great starting point for what we want to do, because it includes data on canopy coverage, demographics, land temperatures, all of these different health measures. But due to some of the unique challenges that we see in Cleveland, what we decided we needed to do was kind of crack that index open, add in a few other variables that are specific to our local context, and then rebuild that index so that we can kind of build the model that we think is most appropriate in Cleveland's context. So what we did was we added in variables around energy burden, which from our clean energy report we learned is really, really problematic in Cleveland. We looked at some of the wastewater, stormwater management variables and data points that we want to make sure we're accounting for. And then we added in some air quality data points. So we really went to that EJ Screen data tool to understand where we can add this extra layer of consideration in. If you skip to the next slide, you'll see the list of all of the variables. So this is what's in there. So on the left side, you'll see the indicators that came out of the tree equity score. So the canopy model comes from a software platform that the American Forest uses, and then a lot of census data. So percent in poverty, percent people of color, unemployment rate. Seniors and children get combined into an index. It really is about kind of those vulnerable populations. We know they tend to be more susceptible to some of these heat-related effects from an illness standpoint. So it's really looking at the ratio of seniors and children to working age adults. Urban heat island, we were able to pull out of there and based on some of the USGS Earth Explorer data. And then a lot of data from the CDC Places. It used to be the 500 cities data set. Now it's called CDC Places. So on mental health, physical health, these are kind of normalized indices of things that we think are important. Asthma rates, coronary heart disease. So all of this gets folded into this existing index. So what we wanted to do was add in those Cleveland specific variables. So like I said, we cracked it open and then rebuilt it using the same methodology of normalization and all of those wonderful statistical techniques in there, and added in utility burden. So we were able to get this data through our clean energy report. So GreenLink Analytics, who did that report for us, built the GreenLink equity mapping tool. And they really looked at energy burden using census public use micro data sets. So actually asking individuals about their lived experience and how much they pay for their bill, their energy bills, and cross-referencing that. So a really robust data set around utility burden, and then pulling in a lot of the data points from the EJ Screen tool. So particulate matter, ozone, proximity to traffic, and then also some of our local issues. So we know we wanted to get very narrow and proximate in terms of the water and basement complaints, because that's a good measure of where we have some stormwater challenges that have a very direct effect on residents that we wanted to make sure that we were accounting for. Go ahead and skip to the next slide. It's a little bit easier to see the practical effect of this when we zoom in a little bit. So this is the northeast side of the city of Cleveland. So The neighborhood labels are really hard to see in any context, but really hard to see here in this. So these are kind of the neighborhoods that include Collinwood, Glenville, St. Clair Superior, and then parts of several other neighborhoods. And what you see on the left is the neighborhood model we were using before. And if you look at Glenville, which is kind of right there in the center, Glenville is a neighborhood that is above average in terms of canopy coverage. And a lot of that is driven by Rockefeller Park, kind of to the western edge of that, kind of at the bottom of the hill down there, just to the other side of East Boulevard. But what we see is that high canopy value in our old approach gets applied to the whole community. So all of the blocks and all of the streets and all of that good stuff in that neighborhood. So it potentially limits what planting might occur there if we're not being more precise. And as we move up the hill into the east, when we see in the new approach, which is on the right, we see that there are multiple areas where trees are very likely to be a valuable policy innovation based on this kind of more detailed model that we have. And without this kind of more precise approach, these areas might have been missed. So we think that we're able to drill down and kind of get more strategic about where those trees are going to end up. So if you can skip to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about next steps. And where do we go from here? How are we going to start to put this into practice? And we've pretty much finalized the model, but it is a dynamic thing. It's fairly dynamic in how we adjust it. So if there's something glaring that we've missed in the model, particularly as we've looked at kind of model specification, we're open to talking about adding those variables in and kind of adjusting it as we kind of make it more refined. I think that's great. We've already started to geocode the existing plannable locations that the city has in its database now into this model so that we can start to identify which of those plannable locations are in a high priority area and really start to establish that prioritization model that will guide our own work. Our intent, once we fully finalize the model, is to make this data layer available online. It's our hope that as other organizations start to make decisions about how to prioritize planning activity, that they'll follow this approach. But we also want to be very honest and recognize that this isn't an absolute requirement, right? If there aren't available locations or if organizations serve a different geographical footprint than what the model prioritized, we want them to go ahead and continue to plant trees and follow their approach. What we don't want this model to be kind of an example of where the perfect becomes the enemy of the good, if that makes sense. We kind of want to follow this idea that planting a tree anywhere is better than planting a tree nowhere. So if people want to utilize the targeting approach if possible, great. But if not, we still want them to get those trees planted somewhere in the city of Cleveland because we have such a need for it all over the place. One of the things that we need to do before we fully migrate this data into our WebGIS system or even into CityWorks is to perform some quality assurance and quality control work on that. We may be able to move that data into the WebGIS before that work is complete, but it's really important that we get that work done before we move it into CityWorks, which is our asset management system. We just have to be very cautious about putting bad data in an asset management system because that can cause a whole lot of trouble down the road. We're in the process of securing the authority to get that under contract to do that QA/QC work. So hopefully we'll be able to give an update on that soon. And lastly, but I think probably most importantly, we're going to start to order, and this is actually fall. So we've had to update this a little bit based on ordering timelines. So in fall 2022, not spring 2022, we're going to start to put this work into practice. That's kind of the end of the main part of this. Sandra, you can skip through this. And there's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. But I did include in here, and we can spend as much or as little time on these as anybody wants to, some of the individual maps. And I think you can see, so here's the percent in poverty map. So you can see the relative effect that each variable has on the overall. So there's percent in poverty. I think the next one is probably, I'm going to skip to the next one, unemployment. So very similar as you would expect. If you skip to the next one, I think we're probably looking at, urban heat island is there. So here's some of the health variables. So the prevalence of poor mental, physical, respiratory, and cardiac health. So these normalized variables. So you see concentrations there. I think we skipped past the racial demographic one. Here's your utility burden data set. I think what you start to see is a pattern here in this data that we all are very, very familiar with. Anybody who's looked at some of these things spatially over time are going to recognize the pattern that starts to emerge. Here's your particulate matter around the Industrial Valley. You can see kind of concentrations there. Ozone has a little bit of an odd shape to it. You can kind of see how that kind of works out. And then I think the last one is proximity to traffic, which follows freeways, right? So you can kind of see the impact of freeways on some of this map here. And then last, but certainly not least, would probably be water and basement complaints, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, and you can see kind of those concentrated on the northeast and southeast sides. So I think it's a good model. I think it's something we're really excited about and excited to talk about and share with people. So I think I will stop there and turn it back over to Sandra to get our next presenter up here to kind of roll forward.
Thanks. We do have a couple of questions that I'll pose to you if we have a little time and before you have to leave. We have a question from Shelley about parking lots and whether it's feasible to focus on trees and parking lots as a function of runoff reduction and filtration. And I might expand this a little bit to just ask you what the available planting spaces are that you would use this tool to make decisions about.
So I think in the most immediate realm, it would be our street tree planting process. But I think we're going to have a larger conversation at some point about land reuse just generally. And I think Shelley's question about trees and parking lots as a way to control runoff and do this sort of thing is a really thoughtful, kind of important question to have. I think we're going to have discussions around vacant land. I know we're working in conjunction with our wonderful friends at Western Reserve Land Conservancy on a couple of things around vacant land use utilization. And I think we even had a panel here at the summit about that before. I think 28,000 trees a year is a ton of trees, right? And I think we just need to be honest with ourselves about what that's going to take from a space standpoint. Just the sheer space of doing that is going to require us to start to think differently and start to think about more creative and innovative ways to get more trees planted in the ground.
Great. We have a question from Kevin about the money for Mayor Jackson's $1 million commitment and what the source of that is, whether it comes from ARPA, infrastructure, or other sources.
No, the $1 million is part of the capital budget. So we've been able to fold that $1 million into our regular capital budget planning process. So that's independent of any one-time ARPA or infrastructure money that may come along. And I think it's important to have it as a dedicated source that isn't a one-time pot of money because it's a 10-year commitment. And we can't kind of speak for whatever's going to happen after this year, but we want to see that continue beyond the life of this. So ARPA money, for example, basically is going to run out. Or not run out, but it has to be spent by 2025 or 2026. I forget the year end on that, but we want this to be repeatable. So it's been added directly into the city's capital budget for that.
Great. And we have a number of questions. I'm going to move to the next speaker so we have enough time for everyone, and then we can come back to these at the end. So thanks very much. Next up, we have Elizabeth Grace with Western Reserve Land Conservancy, who will talk to us about the Cleveland Tree Coalition.
Thanks, Sandra. And thanks, Jason. I'm not a data person, but I have to say that tree equity score, I really get excited about that. So thanks for all your work on that. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Grace. I am the Director of Urban Fundraising at Western Reserve Land Conservancy, and I'm currently the chair of the Cleveland Tree Coalition. Next slide, please. So as we've already spoken about today during the previous presentation, the city of Cleveland, once known as the Forest City, has lost half of its tree canopy over the past 50 years. And we're considering tree canopy is the percentage of the city that is basically shaded by trees. Next slide, please. So as Jason and Sandra mentioned, the tree canopy in the city of Cleveland is down to 18%. The Cleveland Tree Coalition, we consider a healthy tree canopy to be at least 30%. And as was mentioned previously, we are working toward a goal of restoring the tree canopy to 30%. Next slide, please. So today we're continuing to lose between 75 and 100 acres of tree canopy per year in the city of Cleveland alone. Collectively, the coalition, and special thanks to the city for really ramping up efforts, is planting about 5,000 trees per year right now. We do need to plant around 30,000 a year to reach that goal of 30%. And the Cleveland Tree Coalition is working with member organizations on how to achieve that. Next slide, please. So the coalition is a group of over 40 public, private, and community stakeholders that are partnering with the city of Cleveland to rebuild our urban forest. Pictured here are the 9 members of the executive committee that are currently leading the coalition. Next slide, please. And right now, our goals are to raise $100 million over 10 years, start to change the public sentiment around the importance of trees, helping folks understand the benefits and the need for more trees. We're also looking to engage residents in the tree planting and preservation work of the coalition. And along with the city of Cleveland, as Jason mentioned, we are promoting tree equity in the many low canopy neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland and prioritizing those for tree planting. And the coalition also works together to assist member organizations to collaborate and communicate together as we're replanting Cleveland. Next slide, please. So this is just a graphic of the trees that have been planted by, or given away actually, by the coalition in the first 5 years of its existence. So from 2015 to 2020, you can see here that we've collectively planted about 16,000 trees and given away almost an equal number. Next slide, please. Thanks. What the coalition's been up to this year in 2021, we celebrated Arbor Day with a webinar that focused on trees and equity. You can see the speakers that were featured here. We also celebrated Arbor Day with a tree planting at Zone Recreation Center in the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood. Next slide, please. We also, this year, the coalition started a grant program for members that will fund tree planting and maintenance activities in the city of Cleveland. Our first grant, which was made from a gift from the Wesley Family Foundation, was awarded to a partnership between the Famicos Foundation and the Cleveland Clinic, and they planted trees at the Wilson School here in an outdoor classroom. Next slide, please. The coalition is also working with Riddall Green Partnership to create a new containerized tree nursery in the city of Cleveland. And if you want more information on the coalition, you can visit the coalition website. You can also contact me. I will put my email in the chat. If you'd like to attend a meeting, the meeting at this point, the meetings are virtual in 2021. So our next meeting will be held, or quarterly, it will be held in December. So we'd love to have you join those meetings. You can send me an email and I can add you to the list. And I'll be happy to take questions.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. I'm looking to see about from Matt about trees and species that will prove resilient to climate change and other conditions that come in the coming decades. And do you want to talk about tree plan? I shared a link.
Yes, but well, yes, thanks for sharing the link, Sandra. Basically, I think that definitely the Cleveland Tree Plan does need to be revisited to address the climate change situation. I know that there are trees that are in the plan that soon may not be appropriate for our climate, tree species. So the coalition will be working on addressing the changing climate and how we can update the species that are in the plan.
Great. We have other questions that there are questions about trees in general, not. So let's move on to Courtney, who can talk about the group, and keep putting your questions in the chat. I have a couple questions for you also. As Elizabeth and Courtney reflecting on Jason's presentation, how decisions are happening on owned land. How can we continue to drive good decision making on land that's not owned by the city? And how can the Cleveland Tree Coalition for City working contribute to that?
Yeah, Sandra, you're kind of breaking up. I don't know if you want to put that in the chat.
We'll move on to the next speaker, Courtney Blashka.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Elizabeth, for great update on the Cleveland Tree Coalition. Thank you. There's my first slide. So as they mentioned, I'm Courtney Blashka, and I'm co-chair of the Forest City Working Group, along with Kathy Lynn of Sustainable Cleveland, who is behind the scenes here today. So I just wanted to take a few quick minutes. I'm sure you all make it quick to introduce you all to the Forest City Working Group. Next slide, please. So the Forest City Working Group, for those of you who don't know, was formed at the very first Sustainable Cleveland Summit, and its name pays homage to the fact that Cleveland was once named the Forest City. And so this group, this Forest City Working Group, was really a driving force in getting the Cleveland Tree Plan drafted in 2015. And unlike the Cleveland Tree Coalition, which is comprised of governmental agencies and businesses and nonprofit partners, the Forest City Working Group is open to anyone who wants to be plugged into ways to increase tree canopy and preserve it in Cleveland. So it's open to everyone. Next, please. And this is just a page from the actual Cleveland Tree Plan, which establishes a roadmap for rebuilding Cleveland's urban forest through partnership. And it outlines these 3 goals at the top and 9 action steps for getting this accomplished. Next. And the Forest City Working Group, I think, is focused on a really fun action item, which is action number 2, which is develop and implement an outreach and education strategy. Next. And specifically in action number 2, we are focused on step number 5, which is to bring awareness to the importance of preserving our natural heritage. There are a lot of groups focused on planting, which is phenomenal, and education and stuff, but we really want to bring awareness to these giants of the urban forest and celebrate them through creation of a landmark tree registry. And through this, we're specifically focused, this last year we were focused on the Moses Cleveland trees and the Liberty Row oaks. Next, please. So again, there are quite a few of these gentle giants. This is a picture of A.B. Williams, who was a curator with the Natural History Museum, measuring a Moses Cleveland tree. There were a couple hundred of them, and the Forest City Working Group spent a lot of time during the pandemic working with the Western Reserve Historical Society to locate trees that are still standing, because there are still quite a few of them. And this July, which was the 225th anniversary of when Moses Cleveland landed on the banks of the Cuyahoga River, we celebrated this date by several fun events and completing this inventory of these Moses Cleveland trees. Next, please. So here's fun event number 1. We were able to co-host Doug Tallamy, who is an entomologist and professor at the University of Delaware. We hosted this event with the Cleveland Pollinator and Native Plant Symposium with Western Reserve Land Conservancy and the Lake Erie Allegheny Partnership. And he was able to introduce his book called his latest book called The Nature of Oaks, which was great because many of these Moses Cleveland trees that are still standing, a large percentage of them are oak trees. Next slide. We were also able to, in July, host 2 common ground conversations. These took place at Lakeview Cemetery because Lakeview Cemetery is home to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Moses Cleveland trees. Next. And this Saturday, if you're free, I would highly encourage you to sign up for a tour. We're going to repeat the tour back by popular demand since the other ones filled out pretty quickly. So there's the registration link. We'll put it in the chat if you would like to tour this gorgeous garden cemetery and take a look at the remaining Moses Cleveland trees. Next, please. And here's fun event number 3 we did through the Forest City Working Group. We were able to connect in person at the Forest City Brewery in Ohio City with other green-minded folks from the Cuyahoga River area of concern to talk about, they were celebrating beneficial use impairment that was removed from the river. So we were able to talk about the importance of trees to protect and preserve waterways. Next slide, please. And again, we'll be focusing now on these Liberty Row oaks. Liberty Row oaks wind through 7 miles of tree-lined boulevards through Cleveland Heights, Shaker Heights, and the city of Cleveland. And these were planted to commemorate those who'd lost their lives during World War I. There's several hundred of these oaks planted. And next, please. So there's a World War I memorial, which will be installed this fall. So we are planning another event next year, perhaps closer to Memorial Day, to celebrate and honor these living legacies in our urban forest. Next. So thank you so much for your time. And if you would like to join the Forest City Working Group and get updates about all things trees, Kathy's she's phenomenal at sending out links and updates to everyone who is on her mailing list. And there's her email right there. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Hopefully it won't be breaking up as much. Am I okay, Courtney? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It started getting a little bit breaking at first, but now you sound good.
Okay. Can you speak to Moses Cleveland trees that are not within Lakeview Cemetery, but in areas by East Cleveland off Superior, what their condition is and what you know about them?
Yeah, so as with our intern, we were ground truthing a lot of the trees that the members of the Forest City Working Group found, and there are various states of health. So I'd like to send out a link to everyone, hopefully by the end of the year, that includes a map with some information about not only the species, but the health of these trees. A lot of them are not in great condition, but the owners of these trees, many of them are on private property, are very proud of them, and they're excited to show them off.
Great. We have a variety of questions. Actually, if I can ask the speakers, if you can turn on your videos and microphones, we'll go into general discussion. I will keep my video off for the moment to see if my audio comes through any better. But we have a question about species of trees. And so we had the question earlier about given climate change species recommendations. We have another question about edible trees, including fruit and nut trees. Courtney, I know you helped do the updated Appendix A that was published by the Tree Coalition last year. Could you just talk a little bit about what's in that appendix and how it might be useful to people?
Yeah, the appendix includes a lot of trees that the Arboretum and other cities in Northeast Ohio have found to be really resilient in light of climate change. We have decades and decades worth of data on a lot of the trees that are planted up here at the Arboretum. So we looked and teased out all of the different cultivars, which are cultivated varieties of trees, and put them in the list if they seem to be holding up well to diseases and pests, and included many others that are currently in the nursery industry that are, again, resistant to a lot of pest and disease issues, which seem to be afflicting not only our native trees, but other cultivars. We are also hoping to update it to include, since it's very popular, the edible trees. There's a lot of interest in fruit trees. So again, with urban forestry, we're typically not focused so much on fruit trees because we're thinking of planting trees in areas of high traffic and where people are parking their cars and other things. But we definitely want to add a new section of recommended and hardy fruit and nut trees.
We have a couple of questions about ordinances and permits that are required for removing healthy large trees. I'll bounce this one to the chief. Could you talk about our current landscape for ordinances and what we see in other cities that we might emulate in Cleveland?
Yeah, so we do have a tree preservation ordinance, and it really links back directly to development projects. So as you're looking at development projects in the city of Cleveland, if you're going to be impacting trees, you really, it depends on the type of development and where it is and the size and those sorts of things. There's different kind of guidelines and rules for what you would need to do in that situation. So it is something that we're focused on. I think it becomes a bit tricky sometimes in the application and the enforcement of it, but it is something that we focus on a little bit. I think for us, it's understanding really kind of the big drivers of canopy or tree loss in Cleveland too, and understanding kind of what's really happening, particularly as we look at the street tree side of things as well. It's a lot of issues that tie back to utility replacements. So we've got to figure out how to have really good working relationships with our utility companies, and particularly the gas company. And they've gotten much better and are much more directly engaged with Jennifer Kipp, who's our head of our urban forestry operation, about kind of pre-planning to see what we can do to avoid taking down larger trees as they kind of come through and do some of their pipeline replacement program work in the city of Cleveland. And then we also see a lot of it impacted as we look at sidewalk work. And I think we're paying a little bit for decisions that have happened over time about putting trees in certain places with different structures. Maybe the tree's too large for the tree lawn in that area. But we also need to start to think a little bit about better and more thoughtful ways to do sidewalk replacement as we come through, and kind of, can we shave the sidewalk down without having to break it out and put new concrete in? Or can we look at narrower sidewalks as opposed to, the 48-inch sidewalk that we've got now? So there's a lot of moving pieces and parts in that. But we do what we can do, and we try to permit and require as much work as we can be done in a way that's going to protect those trees. But I think there's still a lot of room for growth at the city level and improvement there that candidly we need to think about.
Terrific. I'm posting a couple more questions in the chat, and if you have answers to these or questions for the panelists, please post your questions. I'll also scroll up to see if I've missed anything. For Courtney and Elizabeth, the question that I posed to attendees, I'll post to you as well, is what ideas are the Forest City Working Group and Cleveland Tree Coalition working on to drive tree planting on property that is not city owned?
I'll go first, Courtney, if you want. Well, I think I can speak more from the perspective of Western Reserve Land Conservancy. We do have a tree distribution program, and I think basically grassroots work to get the word out, talking to folks about the importance of trees, the benefits of trees, really in person, and then offering to them a tree at no cost, giving them a little bit of education on how to plant and care for it. That's what we're doing, is really going door to door, neighbor to neighbor, to try to help folks get trees in their yards. So that's what's happening at the Land Conservancy. I don't know, Courtney, do you want to share anything more?
Yeah, but we appear to have a siren going off here. So I'm saved by the bell. But again, I was going to talk about education. It's key, especially with the tree steward program.
Yeah, and I can speak to that too a little bit. The tree steward program is a program that takes place once a year, where folks can spend about 4 weeks in online sessions, is how it took place in 2021. That most likely will again occur in 2022. And then they are offered an in-planting pruning workshop and an in-person tree planting workshop in order to become more educated on the biology of trees, how to care for trees, how to plant them. And so that takes place through Western Reserve Land Conservancy as well. Is your alarm done, Courtney?
Yeah, someone set the security alarm. Didn't realize it was still here.
So one of the things I think, Courtney or Sandra, I don't know if you could talk about your People for Trees program. I think that's another good one that we can point to.
Okay, just wave if my audio cuts out. But People for Trees is a new campaign campaign from Holden Forest and Gardens that asks people to pledge to plant a tree. So if you're doing any planting projects, let us count your tree. Our goal is to count 15,000 new trees in Northeast Ohio by 2025. If you take a pledge at our website, holdenfg.org, you'll get signed up for timely, not email, but timely email about how to plant and care for your tree, and different classes and resources that will help you learn more about being a better steward of our urban forests. So that's called People for Trees, and it's at holdenfg. Thanks for allowing me to plug. We have a question from Ari, I hope I pronounced that right, about how this tree initiative is working with mapping and planning being done for our park study that was discussed in another session.
So I can take that one. We're starting to see a lot of alignment in it, right? And that's one of the values of doing this type of data work, and particularly adding the spatial element to the data analysis part of it is we start to see patterns and we start to be able to find and identify those places of overlap. So what we want to really focus on doing here is taking this approach that we're using for kind of equitable tree planting, and then start to ingrain it in as many different aspects of our work. In the green space overlap and the park planning overlap of this is it's just too much of a natural kind of fit not to do. So we're working to embed and build those things together now, and thinking about how do we begin to add more of these elements into our trees. We've had a lot of discussion recently regarding some of the planting initiatives that we want to do around Clark Park. Or Clark Fields, so that's sorry, not Clark Park, Clark Fields, which, down in southern end of Tremont, and how do we start to get more trees into there and really leverage some of that kind of green space development that's going on there in a way that promotes some of the tree work as well. So we're starting to see a lot of alignment between those and really being intentional about that now.
We have a question from Myring about large-scale plantings at schools and other places with large properties. I will say, if you can hear me, the Cleveland Tree Coalition released a study in 2020 of the 25 largest landowners in Cleveland that looks at how tree canopy varies by those largest landowners. About 1/3 of the city area is owned by those 25 largest landowners. And another 1/3 of city area is owned by private residential homeowners. So by targeting just private residential homeowners and those 25 stakeholders, we can affect 2/3 of the city of Cleveland. I'm glad my audio is better, thank you. But to Myring's question, how can we get large landowners on board, such as the school district, to plant more trees?
Yeah, I was going to add, Sandra, that I think schools are a great idea, and I know many coalition members have worked to plant trees at schools. One of the issues is maintenance and watering, really. So the trees that all of the member organizations plant need to be watered weekly for the first 2 years at least. And so and whether it's coalition members or even private contractors, that maintenance just has to be in place. Sometimes schools can help, but usually they leave in the summer. So then we're left with a gap. So the main consideration is just making sure that the maintenance is available.
And making sure that specific maintenance person, whoever that person is on board is really big too. Okay, well, last call for any questions. I'll end with just a question. What's your favorite tree, panelists? Elizabeth, what's your favorite tree?
Oh, I feel like it changes all the time. We lost an oak tree in our front yard, so I think I'm mourning that loss and contemplating replanting, possibly with an acorn from another tree. So today it's the oak tree.
From a Moses Cleveland.
Yeah.
Courtney, what's your favorite tree?
Very similar to Elizabeth, where it kind of bounces around, but certainly right now, Tupelo or black gum.
Hmm.
It's almost in its full fall color right outside here at my window. So stunning, gorgeous, native, love it. Can't wait to plant it.
Jason?
I'd probably have to say, I remember as a kid, we had a couple apple trees in our backyard, and it's a lot of sense memory attachment to those trees, and a lot of good childhood memories tied to them. So I'll go with an apple tree.
Great. I'll go with American beech. So beech leaf wilt really scares me, but well, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees for joining this session on trees. We will be wrapping up for closing remarks at 4:30 on the main stage. So we have other favorite trees in the chat. Please drop those before you leave. We have a pin oak nomination. So thanks again for your attention, and thanks for attending the summit.